Let's talk about George Washington some more. There's a lot of myths that get associated with George Washington that surround George Washington. One of the biggest myths that surrounds Washington is, you have the cherry tree myth. You also have the myth about his teeth, that he had wooden teeth. And that's entirely untrue. Washington actually had metal dentures and dentures with donor teeth in them. He did have I think cow teeth at one point was made up one of the dentures, but he also had teeth implanted because some of his teeth fell out. And those teeth were from some of his slaves. Washington owned slaves. That's another myth we kind of got to deal with about George Washington. We like to think of George Washington as being the great founder of our country, someone who stood for freedom, someone who stood for the freedom of the American people, while at the same time holding slaves. Washington is a very interesting person to look at from that perspective because, yes, he owned other human beings at the same time that other people wanted to set them free. If you kind of look at the past of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, especially those pasts concerning slavery, they're kind of the opposite of one another. Thomas Jefferson talks about the evils of slavery in one of the first drafts of the Declaration of Independence. He goes on to talk about how it's a moral wrong and other things, yet by the end of his presidency, he's defending slavery. George Washington, on the other hand, probably doesn't see a problem with owning slaves. He gets slaves from his wife. He uses slaves at Mount Vernon. One of the people who ride beside him throughout the entire Revolutionary War, a gentleman by the name of Billy Lee, is his slave and is indebted to him and serves him throughout the entire Revolutionary War. Washington also kind of softens on slavery as he gets older. And that's not to say, and I'm not trying to defend or excuse that Washington owned slaves. It's wrong. I mean, even at the time, there were people who were abolitionists or manumitionists who believed slavery was wrong. So Washington actually has his slaves freed upon his wife's death. Not his death, mind you, his wife's death. So Washington becomes a manumissionist. So he's a complicated figure, and some of those myths are cool and interesting to figure out. We're going to talk more about Washington and some of the first presidency here coming up. Click like and follow.